I remember the exact shade of the sky that night, a deep indigo, the kind that makes the city lights look like stars that refuse to die. The Luminaria Gala was Chicago's crown jewel of excess, where old money came to congratulate itself for existing. The marble steps leading up to the museum gleamed like polished arrogance, and every face that passed through those glass doors seemed to believe the night revolved around them. I wasn't there for their validation. I was there to be seen, by the right people, for the wrong reasons. My gown was midnight blue, silk that clung like confidence. The tailor had asked if I wanted sequins or a train, but I said no. I didn't need embellishment to be noticed. The simplicity was my armor. It whispered power in a room that only understood shouting. When I stepped inside, the air thickened with perfume, ambition, and the faint hum of superiority. Eyes followed me, curious, assessing, and in some cases dismissive. I'd grown used to that kind of gaze, the one that tries to categorize you before your first word. They didn't see Saraphina Vance, founder of Apex Dynamics, one of the fastest rising tech firms in the country. They saw an outsider who'd somehow slipped past the velvet rope. And that was exactly how I wanted it. A waiter approached with a tray of champagne. I took one glass, thanked him by name, his badge said Eli, and his eyes flickered in surprise. Most guests didn't even see the staff. That small recognition was the first act of defiance. Power, I'd learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet refusal to forget someone's humanity. Then came Cassandra Davenport, the name that echoed through boardrooms, charity luncheons, and luxury gossip columns. She glided through the crowd like someone who believed gravity bent for her. Platinum hair, flawless posture, and a diamond necklace heavy enough to anchor a small ship. When our eyes met, I saw curiosity flicker, then die, replaced by something colder. Amusement, perhaps, or threat. She smiled, the kind of smile that cut. "I don't believe we've met," she said when she approached. Her voice was honey over steel. Around her, a small entourage of socialites waited to laugh on cue. "No," I replied evenly. "I don't believe we have." Her gaze lingered on my dress, then my skin, then back to my face. "Are you with one of the sponsors? Or perhaps part of the service team?" The pause before the last words was deliberate, a blade wrapped in velvet. I sipped my champagne. "I'm here as a guest," I said simply. Something flickered in her eyes, disbelief, followed by irritation that I hadn't played the part she'd written for me. "How lovely," she said finally, turning to her audience. "I do adore these community outreach programs. It's so important to see ambition in unexpected places." The laughter that followed was rehearsed, brittle and heavy with the comfort of privilege. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, I raised my glass slightly, as if toasting her, and walked away. If arrogance was her weapon, composure would be mine. At the edge of the hall, I found a quiet spot beneath a modern art installation, twisting steel and glass catching the chandelier light. I let the noise fade behind me, breathing in the faint scent of lilacs from the courtyard. I wasn't angry. Anger was predictable. I was calculating. Every empire has its cracks. You just need to know where to press. From across the room, Cassandra was still watching me, her expression smug. She thought she'd put me in my place. She didn't realize she'd just revealed hers, perched high on a throne built from inherited power. Unaware, the ground beneath her was shifting. A man beside her whispered something that made her laugh again. It was the kind of laugh that belonged to people who had never feared consequences. I took a sip of champagne, smiled to myself, and murmured softly, "Enjoy tonight, Cassandra. Tomorrow you'll learn what it means to underestimate me." I set my glass on a nearby table, adjusted my gown, and walked toward the terrace. The city stretched below, a glittering grid of ambition and hunger. Somewhere out there, my team at Apex Dynamics was finalizing the algorithmic audit that would change the market landscape forever. I'd planned to announce it next quarter. But after tonight, I decided to move faster. Revenge, after all, is most poetic when it's efficient. The wind outside was cool against my skin, carrying the faint echo of music from the gala. I looked back through the glass doors at Cassandra, radiant, untouchable, oblivious, and smiled. Let her think she'd won something. People like her never realize they've already started losing until it's far too late. The night had a rhythm, laughter, music, and the constant clinking of glass. On the surface, it was elegance. Underneath, it was survival. Every glance was an evaluation, every conversation a negotiation for proximity to power. I'd learned early that the people who talked loudest about class were usually terrified of losing it. I lingered near a sculpture, brushed bronze shaped like a flame, when Cassandra appeared again. I could tell by the way the crowd parted for her, as if instinctively clearing the way for royalty. Her circle followed, the same predictable constellation of names that filled the society pages: heirs, influencers, and professional flatterers. Their laughter arrived before they did. "Well, if it isn't our mystery guest," Cassandra said. Her tone was sweet enough to rot teeth. "I was just telling everyone how brave you are, showing up alone. Most people wouldn't dare." "I don't think courage is defined by company," I replied evenly. She tilted her head, studying me as if I were a curious art exhibit she didn't quite approve of. "Oh, darling," she said, the word laced with sugar and venom. "Everything in this room is about definition. Who you are, what you wear, where you sit," her friends chuckled. I caught the eye of one, a man who looked faintly embarrassed, but he didn't say a word. That was the problem with people like Cassandra. Their power depended on silence, on others choosing comfort over conscience. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne. Cassandra took 2 glasses. "Here," she said, handing me one. "A toast. To ambition." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "To ambition," I echoed, raising my glass. Then deliberately she tipped her wrist. The golden liquid cascaded over the front of my gown, a slow, deliberate pour disguised as clumsiness. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The music didn't stop, but it faltered, just enough for the moment to stretch. "Oh my goodness," Cassandra exclaimed, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "I'm so clumsy. I do hope that wasn't too expensive." Every instinct told me to react, to tear away the mask, to expose her cruelty for what it was. But revenge requires patience, and I've never been fond of giving audiences what they expect. I looked down at the champagne dripping from my dress, then back up at her, and smiled. Small, precise, deadly. "Accidents happen," I said softly. "But sometimes they have consequences." The smile faltered on her lips. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but I caught it. The flicker of unease in someone who's always believed they control the narrative. I turned away without another word. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step measured. Behind me the whispers began. Curiosity, mockery, amusement. I let them talk. Noise is only power when you listen to it. In the corridor outside the main hall, I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. "Marcus," I said. My voice was calm, the kind of calm that always made my team nervous. "I want a full breakdown of Davenport Consolidated. Assets, partnerships, pending deals, especially the Innovate acquisition. Pull the data tonight." There was a pause. "You want me to hit them?" he asked quietly. "I want to know where to aim," I replied. By the time I re-entered the ballroom, the stain on my gown had dried, faint but visible, like a scar that didn't hurt anymore. Cassandra had moved on to another group, laughing too loudly, pretending the moment had vanished with the bubbles in her drink. But I saw her glance toward me, curiosity sharpening into something like fear. She could sense it, the shift in energy, the silent turning of the tide. I stayed until midnight. I smiled, mingled, even thanked the host for a wonderful evening. I made sure Cassandra saw me leave on my own terms, unbroken, untouched. That kind of composure confuses people addicted to control. When I stepped outside, the chill hit me like clarity. Chicago glittered below, alive and indifferent. I took one long breath and whispered to the night, "You wanted a show, Cassandra. Let me give you one." The next morning began with headlines. Davenport Consolidated stock plummets amid market rumors. Innovate acquisition in jeopardy. Apex Dynamics silent. Analysts question Davenport's strategy after sudden overnight shift. In her penthouse office, Cassandra must have seen the same alerts that buzzed across every investor's screen. She would have watched as numbers turned from black to red, her empire's pulse weakening by the minute. I imagined her pacing, shouting for answers, demanding names. And somewhere in that storm of panic, someone would have whispered mine. By noon, my assistant forwarded an email, a request for an urgent meeting, from Davenport Consolidated. I declined politely. I preferred to let anticipation do the work for me. There's a unique satisfaction in silence, in knowing your presence is more unsettling than your words. Cassandra had thrown champagne to humiliate me. I'd thrown precision back at her, and the whole city was watching her drown in the ripples. By sunset, her company had lost $70 million in projected value. By midnight, Innovate's board had requested a review. And me? I was home, sipping tea by the window, watching the skyline glow. My reflection in the glass looked calm, composed, the picture of serenity. Only my eyes betrayed what I felt. I didn't enjoy destroying people. But I did believe in balance, and sometimes balance requires correction. As I closed my laptop, a message from Marcus appeared. They're panicking. Do you want to go public? I typed back a single line. Not yet. Let her sweat. Then I leaned back, the memory of champagne on silk flickering through my mind. Cassandra had tried to mark me with shame. She had no idea she'd only written the first line of her own downfall. 3 days later, I stood inside Davenport Consolidated's gleaming boardroom, sunlight bouncing off the glass walls like interrogation lights. Their offices were all sharp lines and sharper egos, the kind of space designed to intimidate. But intimidation only works on people who believe they have something to lose. I'd already made peace with everything they could take from me years ago. Cassandra was at the head of the table, her confidence restored just enough to fake composure. Her eyes flicked over the room as though trying to command it back into obedience. Around her sat a dozen board members, each pretending they weren't quietly calculating how close they could get to me if things went south. When she saw me, her mouth curved into a brittle smile. "Ms. Vance," she said, voice dripping with performative civility. "I appreciate you coming in. We've been curious about your company's recent activities." "I imagine you have," I said. I didn't sit down right away. I let the silence stretch, a small power move, but one that always worked. People like Cassandra were addicted to rhythm. Silence broke their choreography. She gestured to a chair across from her. I took it, crossing my legs slowly, deliberately. "Apex Dynamics has been quite aggressive on the market," she continued, glancing at her CFO as though reading from a script. "We noticed you've taken a particular interest in Innovate Systems. That's interesting since we were in the middle of acquiring them." "Were," I said softly. Past tense. Her jaw tightened. "This kind of interference isn't exactly professional." "Professionalism," I said, smiling faintly, "isn't what this is about. You see, Ms. Davenport, I've been watching how your company operates, the way it acquires and consumes, how it discards people once it's done using them. Innovate was next on your list. Brilliant minds, small firm, no protection. I don't believe in standing by while someone builds an empire on exploitation." One of the older men at the table leaned forward. "This sounds very noble, Ms. Vance, but business isn't charity." "I agree," I said. "It's evolution. And right now, Apex Dynamics has evolved faster than you have." I opened my folder and slid a printed report across the table. Cassandra's eyes scanned the first page. Her hand froze halfway through the second. It was a summary of internal audits, whistleblower complaints, and the data analysis we'd quietly conducted using Apex's proprietary systems. "I didn't hack her company. I simply looked where she didn't." "You can't possibly think this," she started, "isn't real," I said, leaning forward. "Everything in that file is public record. You just never thought anyone would take the time to connect the dots." For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the minimalist clock on the wall. Then she laughed, brittle, too loud. "You're bluffing." I stood, smoothing my jacket. "Am I? Then call my bluff. But you might want to check the headlines before you do." As if on cue, her assistant entered with a tablet, face pale. "Ms. Davenport," he said quietly, "Innovate just announced they're partnering exclusively with Apex Dynamics. The acquisition's been canceled." Her color drained. "That's not possible," she said, but the words trembled. "You can't." "I already did." I turned to leave. "Next time you decide someone doesn't belong in your room, make sure they don't own the building it's in." The silence that followed me out was worth every ounce of patience I'd spent holding back. 2 days later, her father came to me. Preston Davenport. The name carried weight, but the man himself was all performance. He showed up at my office without an appointment, the kind of entitlement only generational wealth can teach. He walked in without waiting for permission, his cologne arriving 5 seconds before his voice. "Ms. Vance," he said, dropping into a chair. "You've made your point. My daughter acted poorly. But this vendetta you're waging, it's bad business." "Is it?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, business has never been better." He leaned forward. You're dismantling a legacy. No, I said calmly. I'm exposing one. He smirked, the kind of smirk that belonged to men who'd been told they were brilliant their whole lives. You think you're making history? You're just making enemies. You're young, you're ambitious, and you don't understand how these circles work. I folded my hands. You mean the circles that close every time someone like me walks into them? I understand them perfectly. That's why I stopped asking to be invited. His smile faded. You're playing a dangerous game. No, I said softly. I just changed the rules. Right then his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced down. I saw the flicker of shock before he masked it. The headline glowed across his screen. Apex Dynamics secures $3.4 billion Innovate partnership, overtakes Davenport Consolidated in market value. He stood slowly, the weight of realization settling in. You think you've won, he said. This isn't a competition, Mr. Davenport, I replied. It's a correction. As he left, he paused at the door. You'll regret this, he said quietly. Maybe, I said, but not tonight. When the door closed behind him, I allowed myself one small breath. Not relief, not triumph. Just release. Power wasn't about winning. It was about precision. And Cassandra's empire had been surgically dismantled. Not out of vengeance, but principle. That night I stood by my office window, Chicago glowing beneath me. I thought about the gala, the laughter, the champagne, the sound of silk tearing under glass. People often mistake cruelty for strength. They think power means looking down on others. But true power is silent, deliberate, inevitable. It doesn't need applause to prove itself. It simply endures. I lifted my glass, water this time, not champagne, and whispered to my reflection, checkmate. The next morning began with silence, that uneasy, charged quiet before the storm hits. I could feel it in the air, like static waiting to spark. My inbox was already filling with news alerts before sunrise. The headlines read like poetry written in chaos. Davenport Consolidated faces market freefall. Cassandra Davenport's leadership questioned amid investor exodus. Apex Dynamics overtakes rivals in overnight surge. The empire had begun to crumble, quietly, elegantly, irreversibly. I arrived at my office before dawn. The city was still half asleep, but the trading floors around the world were already alive with panic. Screens flashed red as numbers fell. Cassandra had built her company on reputation, not resilience, and reputation burns fast when soaked in arrogance. By 9 a.m., I was watching her press conference live on the large monitor in my conference room. Cassandra stood behind a podium, flawless as ever, the weight of desperation hidden behind a perfect smile. Her tone was rehearsed, smooth, composed, every word carefully curated by a PR team scrambling to hold the dam together. There have been misleading reports circulating about our company's recent market movements, she said. We remain committed to our vision and our investors. The actions of certain competitors have been opportunistic. I almost admired her composure. Almost. Because even as she spoke, the corner of the screen displayed the live stock ticker. Davenport Consolidated, down 8.3%, down 9.1%, down 11.7%. Her words were nothing compared to numbers. Behind her, a reporter shouted, Ms. Davenport, what about the canceled Innovate acquisition? Are you aware Innovate has announced an exclusive partnership with Apex Dynamics? The camera caught it, that flicker in her expression, that single heartbeat of truth breaking through the performance. For the first time, Cassandra Davenport looked uncertain, vulnerable, human. I turned off the screen. I didn't need to watch her unravel in real time. The story had already been written. 2 hours later, my assistant entered, a tablet in hand. Saraphina, she said softly, you'll want to see this. It was an internal memo, leaked. Davenport's board had called an emergency vote. The confidence had evaporated, and so had Cassandra's authority. She was being removed as CEO, effective immediately. The company's official statement cited leadership restructuring to restore stakeholder trust. But we all knew what it meant. The Queen had been dethroned. I should have felt satisfaction, but what I felt instead was something quieter, the steady calm of justice finally balancing the scales. Revenge had been the spark, yes, but this was resolution. Still, not everyone accepted defeat as gracefully. That evening, my security team informed me that Preston Davenport had requested another meeting. I almost declined, but something told me it was time to close the circle. He arrived an hour later, no entourage this time. The man who had once filled rooms with his arrogance now seemed smaller, though his voice still carried the same practiced authority. "You've made your point," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "You've humiliated my daughter, destroyed our company, and turned half the market against us." "Is that enough?" "Enough for what?" I asked. "For you to finally understand that actions have consequences? That cruelty has a cost?" He scoffed. "Don't preach to me, Ms. Vance. You think this is justice?" "It's vengeance dressed in designer shoes." I let the words settle before answering. "If it were vengeance, I would have left you with nothing. Instead, I'm offering you an opportunity." He frowned. "An opportunity?" "Reform," I said simply. "A merger proposal. Apex Dynamics will oversee restructuring, ethically this time. You'll retain advisory positions, but not control. We'll rebuild Davenport Consolidated from the ground up, not as a monument to ego, but as a functioning enterprise that actually values people." He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. "You're serious?" "Completely. You tear us down, then offer to save us?" "No," I corrected. "I offer to save what's worth saving." For a moment I saw something shift behind his eyes, the faint, reluctant recognition that this was bigger than pride. He didn't thank me, of course. Men like Preston Davenport don't know how. But he didn't argue either. He just stood, straightened his coat, and left without another word. When the door closed, I finally allowed myself to exhale. That night, I walked home instead of taking the car. The city felt different, calmer somehow, as if the noise of ambition had dimmed to something bearable. A cold wind brushed against my face, and I thought about Cassandra, the way she had stood at that gala, surrounded by admiration, untouchable in her own mind. I wondered if she was looking at the same skyline now, wondering where it all went wrong. Maybe she'd blame me. Maybe she'd blame the market, the media, fate. But deep down I knew she understood. Arrogance isn't destroyed by enemies. It's destroyed by truth. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. The reports were already coming in. Apex's valuation had doubled. Investor confidence soared. News outlets hailed me as a disruptor, a visionary, the woman who'd outplayed the Davenports. I rid none of it. Praise is just another form of noise. Instead, I opened a blank document and began drafting the new corporate code for the merged company. The first line read, "Power means responsibility, not dominance." I stared at it for a long time. It felt right. Outside, the city pulsed with light, the same city that once measured my worth by my appearance, my background, my silence. Now it spoke my name with reverence. But reverence was never the goal. Balance was. I closed my laptop, leaned back, and let the quiet fill the room. The storm had passed, the empire had fallen, and in its place, something new, something clean, was beginning to rise. A year later, I stood before the same museum where it all began, the Luminaria Gala. The banners were new, the sponsors glossier, but the marble steps were the same. They gleamed under the golden light of dusk, polished to perfection, as if the city itself were trying to rewrite its own memory. I had no reason to attend. No deal to close, no rival to conquer. Yet something inside me needed to stand on this ground again, not for revenge, but for closure. The driver opened my door, and a ripple of murmurs followed as I stepped out. Cameras flashed like lightning. This time I didn't flinch. I'd learned that attention is just energy, and I could decide how to use it. My gown was emerald green, smooth and understated, symbolizing renewal. Around my wrist was a simple platinum bracelet, the same one my grandfather had given my mother. "For when you make them remember your name," he'd said. Inside, the gala glittered with excess as always. Chandeliers dripped light like honey. Music floated through the air, soft and calculated. The crowd shifted, whispers following me like shadows. But there was no laughter this time, no cruel amusement, no mockery. Only curiosity. The hostess greeted me with genuine warmth, not the forced politeness of last year. "Ms. Vance, we're honored you could join us," she said, eyes bright. I smiled. "It's good to be back." In truth, it wasn't about being back. It was about being seen for who I truly was. Not an outsider, not a curiosity, just a woman who had built something unbreakable out of the pieces others had tried to shatter. As I made my way through the hall, I caught glimpses of conversations pausing, eyes darting in recognition. I didn't need to announce my arrival. My name had already done that for me. Near the bar, a young woman in a simple black uniform struggled to balance a tray of glasses. A guest snapped his fingers impatiently, irritation etched into his face. Without thinking, I stepped forward, steadying the tray before it could topple. "Easy," I said softly. "You've got it." Her eyes widened as she recognized me. "You're working hard," I said, smiling. "That's enough for now." I slipped my card into her pocket. "When you have a moment, look up my foundation, the Vance Initiative. We fund scholarships for women in STEM. You look like you belong in a lab, not behind a tray." She blinked back tears, whispering, "Thank you. We all start somewhere," I told her. "What matters is who we lift as we climb." For a moment, the music, the chatter, the entire room faded. It was just the two of us, the girl I once was and the woman I'd become. Passing the torch, then across the ballroom, I saw her, Cassandra Davenport. She stood alone near the art exhibit. No entourage this time. No photographers begging for her attention. Her gown was simple black silk, elegant but unpretentious. Her posture was different too, shoulders slightly slumped, expression softer. When she noticed me, our eyes met. The room might as well have disappeared. There was no hate, no smugness, no lingering resentment. Just recognition. She raised her glass, a silent toast. Not an apology, but an acknowledgement. I returned the gesture. Sometimes peace arrives not with forgiveness, but with understanding. As the night went on, I found myself called to the stage. The host announced my name, the crowd applauded, and I walked beneath the same chandeliers that had once glowed over my humiliation. Funny how the same light can look so different when you stand beneath it unafraid. At the podium, I paused for a moment, looking out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some new. I saw the waiter from last year, now managing the event staff. I saw CEOs and founders, rivals and allies, all waiting for me to speak. I took a breath. "Last year," I began, "I attended this gala as a stranger. Many of you didn't know me, and that was fine. What mattered was what I knew, that true power doesn't need to announce itself. It simply exists, quietly, patiently, until it's recognized." The room was utterly still. "When we mistake cruelty for confidence," I continued, "we diminish ourselves. Power isn't about who you can silence. It's about who you choose to uplift. It's not about dominance. It's about dignity." A murmur rippled through the audience. Agreement, maybe reflection. I smiled faintly. "Every empire built on arrogance eventually collapses under its own weight. But those built on integrity? They last." I didn't mention Cassandra's name. I didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew what story lived between the lines. I concluded softly, "We rise by design, not by permission." Applause erupted. Not the polite kind, but genuine, sustained. The kind that reaches your chest and reminds you why you endured in the first place. I stepped back, letting the sound wash over me. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. I wasn't the outsider anymore. I wasn't the underdog. I was simply Saraphina Vance, the woman who'd turned insult into empire, silence into strength. After the gala, I slipped away early. Outside, the night was cool, the city alive. I looked back one last time at the glowing museum windows. Somewhere inside, Cassandra still stood, talking quietly with a group of investors. Perhaps she'd found her own kind of peace. Perhaps not. But either way, I wished her well. When I reached the steps, I paused and glanced up at the sky. The same deep indigo as the night everything began. A single line from my grandfather came back to me, one he'd whispered when I was a child sweeping floors in his small repair shop. "They'll never see you coming until you own the ground they're standing on." I smiled at the memory. He had been right all along. As my driver opened the car door, I caught my reflection in the window. The same woman, but lighter now, freer. Power had always been mine. I had just stopped asking for permission to use it. The city lights flickered across the glass like applause from a universe that finally understood. And as we drove away, I whispered into the quiet, not as a threat this time, but as a promise. True power lifts others. The words lingered in the air like a benediction, soft, steady, and unbreakable.